Okay, good afternoon. Good morning. I keep saying good afternoon. It's good morning. It's a little bit after 11 o'clock on Friday, Black Friday, they call it. Haven't done one of those in a long time. I guess all you do is really just click on things, but that's a future that's already here, isn't it? For better or for worse. At any rate, he smiled. We proceed. I had already put up video one. Video one is kind of a housekeeping video more than anything else, but it's got some important points in it. I wanted to reiterate that. One is that we talked about the next discussion question, which is based on the alchemy activity and requires that you pay attention to it as soon as possible. And that's particularly true for your board president. That would be Diana. And for the president of I'm sorry, the board president is Rowan, excuse me, from the World Out There team. And Diana is the superintendent of the educational leadership team. They have to get, each of them has to get one discussion question. I'm sorry, I keep saying discussion question, one purpose for your whole team up to me so I can get them back out to the group, the whole group, so they can vote on which one makes sense. Or better yet, that they were somehow the two groups and figure out a way to synthesize the two of them together. Hopefully, I think you can probably do that. And by the way, those of you who answered, and some answered in more depth than others, did a nice job at that. So that was the first video. Also dealt with the final assignment and a reminder that you all must, he shouted, must watch last Tuesday's optional extra help session that we did live. Again, I couldn't require you to be there live unless you were able to. But if you didn't watch it, you need to watch it before you have any kind of questions about getting the final assignment done. So enough said about that. And then the extra piece was my wondering aloud about exactly how I want to handle the Dr. Gonzalez trauma workshop sessions. And Diana and Marlene shouted at me and said, give us extra credit. And I said, I have a good idea. I think I'll give you extra credit. But how I give the extra credit, I haven't figured out quite yet. I'll figure that out before the end of the weekend, I suppose. Enough said. So this is video two. This is a content video, and I'm not going to belabor the pieces all that much. Basically, what I wanted to do is begin to introduce you to some of the change theories. As I said in the first video briefly, and I'll repeat here, is that there's for as many stars there are in the universe, there are change theories. Futuring is a change theory. Futuring is an example of a synthesis of change theories that came before it. I make no mistake about that. Now, whatever change theories we've kind of used with you, we could make an argument for culture being a change theory. Certainly, it's part of any change theory, no question about that. The collective mindset is a change theory. And again, you can see the pieces of that all come from other places. We didn't invent any of those. They all came from other places, except maybe the futuring piece. And then futuring itself, certainly a change theory. So we've acquainted you with some, but we haven't, I have acquainted you with some, but we certainly haven't hit you over the head with a lot because I don't see this course as that. I see far more important, the principles, LES, principles of change that you need to bring together, or not bring together, that you need to embed into your own philosophy of leadership. Needs to be brought to bear. And speaking of that, and I did mention this in the video one as well, is that I'm smiling, understandably so. The approach to the memo assignment and to the modeling of the final assignment that we did this past Tuesday, all smacked of you're thinking as teachers. I'm shouting at you now. You can't think as teachers in this course or any of the other courses. You've got to start thinking as leaders. Even if you don't intend to be a leader, you got to start thinking like one, and we'll let the chips fall where they may after that. So you have to come from the principal perspective, PAL perspective. You got to come from the chair's perspective, the department leaders, the director's perspective of leading a group, of influencing that group to empower each other to work it through. And I made a major case out of that in the last Tuesday's video, which will come to bear a little bit in a moment, as a matter of fact. In fact, I'll go to that first. So what I'm going to do today is a couple of different things. I could spend, this video could easily become a very long one, and I don't want to do that to you. It's Thanksgiving weekend, and enough already. You have enough things to do from me as anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm not going to rush through something, but I'm not going to pound you over the head with it. I'm just presuming that you're going to take your professional responsibility seriously to follow through on some of the links I'm about to show you. So I'm going to do three. Let me bring up the agenda. This will be in the module that I have not put up yet, but it'll be up before the day is done. All right, so you can see this is what you usually see on in each of the modules I've been posting. This speaks for the week of the 23rd, that is to say from yesterday, Thanksgiving, through next Thursday, which would be the end of the month, end of November, it being a shorter month than most. And it has the YouTube links. You can see them in the highlights, and one document. Here's the document. That's it. And we're going to do that one first, and then we'll go over to, and you'll also see that the link for video 1 is already up as well. And so the link for video 2 will be right there. In addition to that, I've posted 2 videos. They're both brief, quite frankly, too brief. One's out of Fullen and Hargraves. Okay. I never remember Fullen's first name, but Hargraves' first name is Andy. And the Lewin is Kurt, K-U-R-T, Lewin as well, whose theory of change is actually kind of intrigues me, to be quite frank, although it's one of the older change theories that's out there. There's also something from a person named and her colleagues. I'm not only naming her, but she's got several colleagues who also contributed to this model, named Priscilla Wohlstetter, who offered up something called the high involvement model. I've changed that because I actually used this model in my own dissertation to the high engagement model. I don't like the word involvement. Involvement sounds like, well, you want to know who won the game last night. You were involved. Engaged means you were playing. There's a difference. And so if you're talking about, making your organization highly engaging, where everyone's contributing and empowering each other to make the whole with a W a better place, that's engaging. And so what Wohlstetter points out is, by way of research, it points out 6 variables. I apologize for the fancy words, but you're all almost doctors in certain senses. And I hope that all of you decide to go after your doctorate. And if you're interested in that, give me a call and I'll help you figure that out a little bit up the road. But I can see all of you, should you have the drive and the interest in pursuing research and applying the research to good practices, you should consider it. Anyway, Priscilla Wohlstetter and her colleagues, Susan Moorman comes to mind, but there were other folks as well, came up with what she called the high involvement model. And the model is sort of on the old side. I would say it's up around 1990s, in the era of the beginnings of Peter Senge. And that would be systems disciplines. And all of that, what that has to do with organizational change. You can see that these things come up and cross over with each other, intersect, as they should. And what she essentially said was that in order for a group to be, any group, he shouted. And by the way, I described this in the collective mindset chapter about collaboration. It's in that chapter. I never remember the numbers of chapters, but it's certainly in the chapter about collaboration. I'm going to do just a quick drive-by here to remind you about that, but for you to understand it more carefully and to take those variables to heart to see whether they apply to how you're going to lead as such. Now, I started to say in the first video, I just remembered now, is that uh, your memos were fine. Your memos lacked this premise, except for one or two. Your memos lacked these issues, these ideas, these variables. I don't blame you for that. That's not your fault. That's mine. I should have emphasized it more carefully. No one's being taken to task for that. Don't worry about it for a minute. But were you to become leaders of a group, of any kind of group, the Boy Scouts, your church group, your family, for heaven's sakes, a school system of any sort, these variables in varying order, in varying orders of strength, really have to be there. If they're not there, then you're not going to have a highly engaged group, and then it's going to be the principal approach, which too many of you, he shouted, too many of you seem to continue to think in how I see your assignments evolving. You're not supposed to think that way. You're supposed to think of yourself as the principal who's going to get other people to want to work with you and for you to make it better for everybody else. I can't be any clearer than that. And so again, the chapter of collaboration speaks to this, and I'm going to just go through these quickly. I didn't put up a video about it. I didn't even look to see whether there was a video about it. I am the video when it comes to this particular piece. So I did my research on it. So my research was on something called Blue Ribbon Schools, which is a government program, federal government program and it's still around, though it's changed since I did my research about it, to recognize highly effective schools. And what we found was that highly effective schools that deserve to be recognized as a blue ribbon, had these qualities in their school system and their faculty, and they were among their stakeholders. In no particular order. I'm sorry, take that back. Erase that. All right. In this order. So here we go. Now, I'm not going to, again, it's in the collaboration chapter. You can go back and look at it. And I recommend that you do that, even for the final assignment, but certainly if you go on interviews or someone to understand this more clearly. And the strongest variable, and I could spend 30 hours talking about this, is the power factor. Now, there's another word for power here. There's something of a synonym here, and the synonym would be boundaries. When you get a group of people together to work on a project, like you did in your memos, to a more or lesser extent, if you're inviting a group of people to sit with you in a committee, they need to know what their power is and what it is not. All too often, this is the major variable that breaks down because people don't know what their boundaries are, and then they get very twisted and upset when suddenly the principal or the chair says, "You can't make that decision. That's my decision." And then people say, "Well, why are we here? What's that about?" And all of that's what that's about, is that the power boundaries weren't laid out properly. Understand that a principal or a superintendent or a supervisor of any kind has a stripe on his or her shoulder, and they have certain powers, certain responsibilities, obligations, and charges that they aren't going to give up unless they tell you that. They say, "This is a democracy. We're going to vote on this, and whenever its majority wins, well, we need to have consensus," which is another word for unanimity. Everyone's going to agree to this, to whatever we're talking about. That's fine, but you need to lay that out straight away and enforce that, because the minute people think that their boundaries are unclear, that's when confusion breaks in and the whole rest of the blocks come tumbling down. The second piece would be knowledge. There's two kinds of knowledge. One knowledge kind or type is the ability to work with each other, to collaborate. which is why this model is in the collaboration chapter. Not every just because everyone's got a master's degree, plus doesn't mean they know how to work with somebody else. How many meetings have you gone to over your school lifetime times where if you had gotten a penny for everyone saying each person saying I think, that you would have made $1 million. There's two people are too willing or too falling all over each other per Senge in team learning, giving them what they think. They're not listening to what anybody else has to say. That's one kind of skill as a knowledge set here. The other one is that you know how to future, that you know how to review data, that you know how to communicate, all those kinds of premises. By research, power is the strongest variable. By research, knowledge is the second strongest. Third piece, strongest, is information. Again, this is a complex process here, but I'll simplify it by saying this. It has two components as well. One is communication. When you're doing something, particularly these committees that you wrote these memos about, when you're doing something, if you're not keeping everybody informed, you'll be asking for problems. There's people who are out, sitting in the faculty room who aren't on that committee and don't pay attention to much of what's going on unless there's a faculty meeting of some sort. They're the kind of people who can pull the whole tower down because you haven't kept them informed and sought their opinion, for that matter. There's an empowerment word again. The other piece of information is data, D-A-T-A. And we've talked about that enough times to remind you that data, when we talk about this component of this variable, we're talking about quantitative and qualitative, not just quantitative, not just the nicest class scores. All right, there's lots of other data out there that helps you, keeps you informed. There's that variable to make the right kinds of decisions together, assuming everybody's got the knowledge to work with that kind of data. Goals are goals. SMART, the acronym SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and targetable. You've heard it a jillion times in, of course, your educational lifetime. I changed this term a little bit. I don't know why I did, but I wanted to use it as a result of the conversation I had with the students who sat with me last Tuesday. And so I'm giving it a fancy term, and I'm calling it distributed empowerment. Wow, that sounds, basically that means you're making people leaders as you need them. An example I always use is when I was a principal a jillion years ago, when I had a teacher who never forgave me for not being the principal before me. He was real buddies with that man who was a great principal, I should add. And when he retired and I became the principal, this particular fellow missed him terribly. I could understand that. Wasn't hurt by that. And he kind of kept his distance from me all the time I was a principal in the building. Not that he wasn't a good teacher. He was a good teacher. And he had his own way of dealing with helping children learn. He was very interested in science. And every year when we had the science test, there's no longer a science test in elementary school, but there was at that time. He would walk into my office and say, the test is coming. I said, yeah, Bob, I know. He says, how do you want me to help? I said, yeah, could you help me out? And he would take care of getting the kits all set up and making sure that the rest of the teachers recognized what the components of the test were, and assuring that all the students in that was fourth grade, all of those students had mastered the skills that they needed to perform successfully. The rest of the year, he didn't want to be a leader of anything else, and that was fine. Now, the good leader, in terms of keeping a school running well, or a department, takes the time to find people to situationally take leadership roles when they're interested in something, or whether they have or whether they have a particular expertise that you don't have. That's what that's about. That's how you force some more engagement. Now, the last two actually are the weakest ones by way of the way these are set up, and that would be resources. And I talked about resources in the discussion about the final assignment template the other day. Resources always translates to money, but not always. So basically we're saying when a group is starting to make or formulate ideas and practices that they're going to share among all of their stakeholders for adoption, you've got to be sure everyone's got the resources to do that. So it's money, but it's not always money. It's time. When you realize it's expertise. So basically it's saying, what do you need to get the job done? And how do you get it? By way of, this is an interesting piece, I won't belabor it for you, but rewards is the weakest variable. And the reason for that is teachers don't expect rewards when kids do well. I'm smiling, I'm laughing, but that's really a wonderful trait, I think. They're not going to get a raise. Neither are they going to get fired if the kids do well. Well, that's not always true. All right. So rewards is intrinsic. Speaks to satisfaction insofar as the whole with a W, circling their wagons around an issue with all those other variables in place to create something new. To create something new, to transform the group. That's your job. And so the high involvement model, I don't think specifically is change theory, but I just think that the issue of collaboration and engagement certainly is a piece of it. So I took the time to include it, also based on the fact that I saw a kind of hole, H-O-L-E, in a lot of the memos that you wrote. And I don't blame you for that because I didn't emphasize it enough. So I'm emphasizing it now after the fact so that you'll have it in your toolkit for the next time. So that's Wohlstetter. Now, the second one, I'm going to skip over Fullen for a moment and go to Lewin. I'm not going to play Lewin's video. It's 6 or 7 minutes long. I'm going to talk it through. And I apologize in advance because teacher talk is the least effective. I've told you more than once. Lecturing is the least effective strategy for learning, even among you smart people like yourselves with all kinds of master's degrees plus. But in the interest of the fact that there is a video, I think it's about 6 minutes long, I'm not going to belabor. I will say that Lewin was not an educator. Lewin was a psychologist. And what Lewin was talking about was some fancy words, but really come to bear to say the same thing. And here they are. One is, here's a fancy word for you. It's not a word you will ever have used until today. Here it comes. Homeostasis. H as in Harry, O, M as in Mary, E, S as in Sam, T as in Thomas, A, S as in Sam, I as in Isabel, my cousin Isabel, and S as in sister. Homeostasis. And all that means is think of a line, a horizontal line that's frozen in place. It's homeostasis. It's homeostasis represents change. Take that back. Homeostasis represents how things are in your organization, in your school practices. They're like this. They're frozen in place by opposing and supporting arrows. You'll see that in the video. You got to watch the video to get the better feel for this. By negative arrows and by positive arrows, and they're holding that line in place. And it prevents change from happening. A good leader has to figure out ways to remove the negative lines and increase the positive arrows to change the position of the homeostasis to something new. Lewin calls it, well, he'll say homeostasis means that you're frozen in place. And what you need to do as leader is to unfreeze it by moving those arrows around. Am I oversimplifying this? Yes, I'm oversimplifying it. What you need to do is translate it to your own situations. Say, oh, how do we place students in E&L programs? Why? What are the forces that pushed us there, and what are the forces that keep us there? If that system doesn't work, what could be improved? Well, I got to maybe change some of these things here. I got to rework these arrows around a little bit, and then I got to refreeze it. And that's what Lewin is talking about. So it's a simplified premise of change, but it's clean too. And I expect that you will watch this 5-minute video. Now, Fullen and Hargreaves are poster boys of change these past several years. Every so often, there's one or in this case two individuals sort of rise out of the conversations about school reform and school change and all of that, and become I hate this word. I'm not demeaning either one of these people, believe me, the gurus of change as such. And I would say that I can't believe I can't remember Fullen's first name. Fullen and Andy Hargreaves are probably the most recognized, internationally recognized experts on school change, especially in Canada, the United States, and England. I'm not sure if it applies everywhere all the time. Their latest book, I think it's their latest book, the one I use in course. I usually use the book in this course, but I didn't use it this time. It's a book called Professional Capital, CAPITAL. Remember, that's capital with an O. That would be like Albany is the capital of New York State. It's not that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. Capital, now we're talking about sources. Okay? The fund, real and imagined, that you have in place. And so they're the people to be admired in their present thinking, and whose premises certainly make a lot of sense. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up that one just for a few minutes and comment to that as soon as I find where I have it. Maybe bear with me. Okay, before I start this, and I already cut some of it short, and I'll comment here and there as Andy Hargreaves speaks. He's already introduced himself and has begun to talk about Professional Capital and his partnership with Fullen.
The title of Professional Capital. We were really writing a book about the quality of teaching and the future of the teaching profession.
All right, now there's for point number one. In the end, what's the most important part about leadership? I guess there's a lot of things we could talk about that, but in the end, I would argue, along with Hargreaves and Fullen, is it's about good teaching, whatever it takes to create quality instruction, the systems, the leadership, the resources that go with that.
Fashion, but it was an idea we stumbled on as we got into the middle of it. And the reason was this. A lot of people were saying, and in a way it was good news, that the most important factor that affects the quality of student learning in the school is the quality of teaching and the quality of the teacher. And the way they thought of this was in terms of what's called human capital. And human capital is not how much money you have, but human capital are the individual assets, skills, qualifications, capabilities that you bring with you into teaching when you begin as a teacher, when you qualify as a teacher, and to some extent, when you develop as a teacher. And important as this idea is in policy, it seemed to be pushing people in some interesting directions. Some were saying more teachers needed master's degrees. Some were saying we needed to raise the bar more on teacher selection. And some were saying also we needed to evaluate teachers more carefully. And we now find ourselves, especially in the US, in a world where teacher evaluation systems are trying to judge the individual competence or human capital of teachers, concentrate on rewarding those at the top and removing those at the bottom. It's less clear about what to do with those in the middle. And when Michael Fullan and I, based on all the work that we have done in different countries such as Canada and the US, looked at what the research was saying on what improved the quality of teaching, this didn't really seem to strike home with us and to fit and seemed to be misguided. So our response was really like this. First, there was something that seemed to us to be wrong with the concept of human capital. That human capital should not just be about people at the extremes, but we really need to be thinking about how to move all of the teaching profession forward, not just a few at the top and a few at the bottom. So somehow we needed to reconceive what we meant by human capital and bringing the brightest and the best into teaching. And then secondly, there seemed to be something missing in relation to human capital. And that is really not the capital that we have individually, but the capital that we have together as a community. Since the 1970s, we've known how this works in communities. People like Robert Putnam have written about this in their book, Bowling Alone. We are stronger as communities when we trust each other, when we work together, when we are collaborative, when we're not isolated or at each other's throats. And the same is true in a school and in a teaching community. And we cite work from a business school professor, Carrie Liana, in New York City, that fairly compellingly in relation to fifth grade outcomes indicates that when you take measures of teachers' individual human capital, their skills and qualifications, and measures of their social capital, how well they work together, who are their colleagues, what the levels of trust are like in a school. Social capital adds value to human capital. So wherever you are, the relationships you have with your colleagues.
That's beautifully put, man. That's why these men are they're the top of the ladder here. We're talking about professional capital, all right? Abilities of individual teachers in terms of their instructional arsenal, how well they were developed in their undergraduate days and into their graduate days. And I have lots of opinions about that being not as consistent as it could be. Also about the conversation about who we hire as teachers. Finland is an example of hiring only the top 10%. And I'm not sure that's necessarily the key to this, but certainly it's worth a conversation if you look at it from a couple of different perspectives. But then Hargreaves changes over, he doesn't dismiss professional capital, rather he says the other piece of that is what he's calling social capital. Social capital meaning the whole with a W, which we keep talking about in this particular class in terms of catalyzing change, and the capacity of the group to nurture each other.
Will improve your performance over time, whatever level you begin. But human capital, the quality you have as an individual, does not add value to social capital. So really, in a sense, we're saying second, that we need to put much more emphasis, not on career tracks for teachers or evaluation or individual rewards, but incentives that will really get teachers and their leaders to work together more effectively with the time and support and focus to bring about changes that are compellingly important for their students. Now we have two kinds of capital, but there seemed to be a third one missing, and that is what happens to teachers over time? What happens to them through the course of their career? How do they develop the capacities for judgment, making decisions, thousands a day that teachers have to make, when the evidence isn't cast iron certain about what exactly they should do at every moment? And the research on other professions, music, cookery, any other area you care to name, is that according to Malcolm Gladwell and the people he cites, this takes about 10,000 hours in teaching, about 8 years. So you're really on top of the job, absolutely in the zone, can improvise a strategy at any moment that is at your fingertips for the circumstances that are calling on you, that you need to provide for your students. And decisional capital is really not just about 8 years of practice and repetition of doing something, but it's also 8 years of challenge, stretching, being coached, being mentored, trying a new subject, a new grade.
Hear that? Coached, mentored, stretched. And that's where you folks come in. How do you continue to, word I like to use, I'm not even sure it's an actual word in the dictionary. I never looked it up. Catalyzed. A catalyst is something that turns something on. Now, there's two ways to look at that. One would be you as the principal, as the chair, instigating, scraping people to be better, than to rethink some things. But even more importantly, and importantly, as I've said 1,000 times today, getting people to turn each other on.
A new concept, a new unit of work. When you add these three things together, human capital, social capital, what we have together, decisional capital, how we develop judgment over time, it brings it together in what we call professional capital. Professional capital is, if you want to get investment, if you want to get a return from teaching in terms of the quality of learning, we have to make an investment in teaching and the quality of teaching. We have to make investments in time, training, recruitment, support, collaboration, and especially leadership, so that teachers together can be better than what they are alone, and so that they can build their competence, expertise, and judgment over time, creating many happy returns for all our children in the generations to come.
Okay. More is there to be said. The other thing I'd like to say before I sign off with this is that I'm sure it's my anxiety, my empathy about your own lives as human beings and as students of this course and other courses that you obviously will be taking or have taken in your own training that you're pursuing, not to mention your personal lives and your professional lives. I'm always very sensitive about that, so I don't put an 1.5-hour video up for you to watch of Andy Hargreaves, or I don't necessarily require that you go read every book there is to be read about change. I think the collective mindset captures virtually everything that Fullan and Hargreaves speak to, but not nearly as well in certain senses as Fullan and Hargreaves will capture in a book like Professional Capital. If you don't already have it in your professional library, you really should make it your business. And just Santa Claus send me the Professional Capital book, or watch some of these other videos that are out there to make this happen. But more importantly, the question is, well, to what extent do some of you have spoken about this a lot, actually, in your discussion questions. To what extent do your present leaders whom you work for, foster these three factors: professional capital, decisional capital, and social capital? Or are they just about, and some of this is a systems issue. Are they just about making sure they observe every teacher they can, 1,000 times, and use a little checklist to determine who's the star and who's not? That's not what. That's got little long-term return. Clearly, it's about your capacity as a leader to empower others to want to do the same things that you want to do. Enough said. So we move on. I'm signing off now. See both of those videos. If you haven't already seen the final assignment video, I'm perfectly willing to help anybody who needs help with the final assignment as we get closer to that. But at the same time, I don't want anyone to say, help me, unless I know you've seen the video, to be quite frank. Enough said. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Get the lights up.